Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight, we look at the idea of justice, the different views of justice through the eyes of cinema. Specifically, the very interesting theme of a new film, Talvar, which explores through one of India's most reported crimes, what different people could think, what different angles of investigation could lead to, who done it. It's a question which has no easy answers. I'm joined now by a stellar team of talent. I'm joined by Vishal Bhardwaj, Irrfan Khan, Konkona Sharma and Meghna Gulzar. Thank you all very much for joining me today on the dialogues. Vishalji, what connected you to this film? You're known really more for your adaptations of Shakespearean tragedy. Did you find this a Shakespearean comedy in many ways?
No, I think it's a bigger tragedy than Shakespeare's tragedies, because here so many things are involved. Our middle class society is involved, the judiciary is involved, the investigative teams are involved. And when I happened to meet one of the investigators for the first CBI team, and I came to know about the sound test they did, because the first question which came to my mind was कि दीवार के दूसरी तरफ दो मर्डर हो गए और पेरेंट्स को कुछ पता नहीं चला. So this was the first question I asked him, and he said, that we called professional hi-fi sound engineers who did a test over there of the sound, and there was a possibility that they couldn't have heard anything that night. So that made me very intrigued, and then we started researching. Then I bounced this idea to Meghna, and then the deeper we went, we found very amusing, disturbing and bizarre facts which we thought that will make a very good whodunit.
Meghna, I mean, coincidentally, this is a story we reported very, very closely, and it's a story which had so many twists and turns and an ending which I think left many people unsatisfied. At that time also, you think that in a way real life has become much more filmy than a film could actually be. When you decided to make a film on this, comment on our society, on our judiciary, is this something that if you thought it was fiction, that maybe somebody would tell you this couldn't happen, this is too bizarre to happen?
Absolutely. I mean, like Vishalji said in a quote of his, that reality is stranger than fiction, and sometimes it's much, much stranger than fiction. So this is, it's beyond Kafkaesque as well. I mean, the way this played out and the other cases that are breaking, it just makes you wonder where we are going as a society.
Were you happy with the verdict?
I can't say I was satisfied.
Irrfan, it's a subject you've researched closely. You apparently met one of the key CBI investigators as well in this. Why did you decide to take this role? I mean, what drew you to it? You play the role of the investigating officer in this. What drew you to it?
I think the story, the power of story and the circumstances in which we are living, and as Vishal Sahab said, it's a bigger tragedy than Shakespeare. Also because we are facing this, and Aam Aadmi is facing it. Everybody is facing these circumstances what the film is showing, and that's frightening. So the drama of being frightened, and drama of being surrounded by this system in which we survive, and how ferocious or how blind or how strange that could become for anybody. So that's and I think, and also because the film language is changing. We are picking up subjects and we are trying to do it in a very interesting way where a youth or young audience can identify with it. So it was for those reasons I didn't see a huge possibility of doing a great performance or something, but the story was very important for me.
What struck you as the difficult part? Because one, of course, dealing with real life people, and then of course the Talvars are parents who are currently in jail as this movie is being released. You met the person who actually carried out the investigation. It's still a case which is an appeal. What is the difficulty of one balancing that line, and also how do you make sure that it's not just a replication of what's on prime time television?
Yes, it was always a concern whether are we just, we shouldn't go, we shouldn't misquote anything. We should stick to the facts. And that was, sometimes it was difficult, because as an actor you want to take a leap, you want to bring the character towards your own sensibility, and you want to add certain things. But in this film we were very, very cautious. Sometimes we used to have questions which I didn't have answers, so I used to come back to her or try to find out on my own way. So being true to what happened was it was more of a cautiousness rather than difficult.
Konkona, in a way the film rests on your shoulders because you play someone, Nupur Talvar, who became almost a divisive character in real life about this. I mean, there were people who had formed opinions about her. I did a television interview with her which had many reactions, oddly enough. How did you channel that? You're a mother yourself of a young child. How did you channel that? How did you decide how to play her?
You know, initially I hadn't followed the case in that much detail, but so I had very little information. I mean, the basic information trickles down to all of us because in such a high profile case you cannot avoid it also. But when I was playing Nupur, I took my cues from of course the script and Meghna, and because this was a film which didn't require too much of getting into the psyche of the character. Like she said, you know, it's all based on facts on the public domain. There are 3 teams for investigation. There are 2-3 different crime scene scenarios which we had to replicate again and again. And I actually found it very interesting to have to play that, you know, to keep that note of ambiguity, you know, between could she be innocent, could she be guilty. And what really surprised me is how quickly people make up their minds based on very little information. Actually, because there is a wealth of information in the public domains, a lot of it is already in our script as well. But I think perhaps when people watch this film, they will, because they will revisit, and a lot of questions have been asked and things which don't make sense or seem odd or just are not satisfactory in some way. So if people can then, you know, make up their minds or at least open the debate a little bit, I think that will be good.
No, the power of the camera, because as I said, after I did that interview, we had so many people coming to us and saying, why didn't Nupur cry during the interview? What kind of, how can a mother not cry during an interview? And I mean, I've said this before, but just to say again that she cried copiously. She cried a lot. She broke down after the interview, but the cameras were off. So also the role of the camera and informing public opinion.
Exactly.
Did you find that you had, did you play her, you said you had to be a very thin line in whether she's innocent or guilty. So did you share sympathy with her? How did you actually treat
I
it?
mean, I think regardless of guilt or innocence, I did feel sympathy for her because I think that it has been a tragedy for the family. Again, the film doesn't try to solve the case, so I myself did not really get into that so much of, you know, what is the actual truth and do I need to know it. I really tried to explore the issue on both sides, you know, to explore it showing her in being guilty and explore it in another way as well. And I think that, you know, somewhere out of all of this a more balanced picture will come out.
Vishalji, you made the point that the film reflects in society what's happening around us. What, in your comment, what do you actually think is happening around us? Whether it's a case, we've seen this craze, as it were, of news being taken over of these kind of sensational crimes. Often the human tragedy of it is forgotten, but whether it's the case of, in Mumbai, of course, what happened with young girl Sheena Bora, Indrani Mukherjee, whether what happened with Arushi, where it becomes about almost a voyeuristic need to know, where you see more serious news channels, perhaps this becomes news in today's society. What's the comment you would make about this?
Well, you know, sometimes when I see the news, especially the Hindi news channel, and when they use the background score behind the news, it really amazes me and disturbs me, because we use the background score in our films to lead to the audience towards a certain emotion that you are supposed to feel like this. But when I see behind the news, it really disturbs me that what is the news channel or the media is trying to do. So this sensationalism of the whole media and the news is actually really disturbing, because the moment it dies down, you know, it goes on to the 7th page or the 8th page, and the biggest tragedy I think in this Arushi murder case is like Hemraj. No, you know, it's called Arushi or a double murder case, but we forget about that poor servant who, you know, who may be the sole bread earner of his family, and we just talk about Arushi.
Did you find that, Meghna, as well, when you talk about the tragedies of different ways? One, of course, is perhaps the class divide. That Hemraj's story got lost really in the, I suppose, the human tragedy, the potential it would be of a young girl murdered and her parents as potential suspects and now convicted. That's one tragedy, but there were so many other layers of the story. The fact of how the judiciary interacts, the fact of how the police investigation is handled. How much did you actually say talk to the Talvars before this movie was made? Did you talk to other how did you try to keep it as true as possible? Would you see this almost as a film, a fiction issue, or almost in a kind of more documentary style?
No, I wouldn't call it a documentary. It has been treated like a
Yes,
a film. But your question on fiction, everything which is there in our film in terms of content is based on material available in the public domain. There is very little modification of the data on the case. At the most, what we've done is amalgamated a few characters, because it went on for so long and there were so many people involved, so many waves of investigation, so much manpower. We can't really keep it that authentic, because you will not have a single identifiable character as a viewer. So those kind of things. Once we knew on the basis of everything that we had compiled a rough timeline, is when we started speaking to everyone involved in the case, whether it was the investigators, whether it was the family, just to get an insight to a layer which was beyond the reporting. That was actually what was involved.
Is it tough to leave the verdict with the viewer in a sense? Because that, as I said, again is an ongoing case. You said earlier you weren't satisfied with the verdict. What didn't satisfy you?
It didn't convince me 100%. You know, I'm saying that I can't say that they are 100% innocent, but in the same way I cannot say they're 100% guilty. So if you're asking me, it is not completely and fully a convincing judgment or a sentence or a punishment or a convincing closure of this particular case. I feel so.
In fact, Irrfan, taking off from that point, in a film where there perhaps is not an identifiable hero or an identifiable villain, when it's not all about the strong character you can play or you can imagine him, when they're all real life characters, what was the commentary you came out with? When you researched on this movie, it may not have been something, a case you followed closely, but when you came out to say as a commentary of the society we're in today, what were your conclusions?
What I'm doing in all my stories, you know, I'm trying to rediscover other things, like, you know, definition of heroism. Like what is heroism? So if I if I choose a character like Lunchbox, I see him as a hero because he's generating some emotions which, you know, which might, you know, stay with you, and so things like that, you know, like when you do a love story, you rediscover romance in different ways. So hero doesn't need to be a stereotyped hero, and I don't represent that. You know, I am trying to rediscover myself through my work, and you know, all these definitions, you know, heroism or romance or love or hate or anger and whatever, you know. So these stories give you a chance to, you know, to do that. What was heroic about Ashwin Kumar? You know, what was he doing? And more than that, you know, the important thing for me was the grain of the story. You know, what it's trying to do is trying to make you realize certain things. You know, like yesterday after the screening, somebody got up and said, "Okay, why weren't you brave enough to say that what happened? Really, you know, why couldn't you do that?" But you know, cinema has its own limitations, you know, because of the money involved and some things you can't say. But you know, creating an awareness, because bravery comes after awareness. You know, when you're aware, you are more brave. So if the film can create an awareness about certain things, that gives a power, you know, to common man. And I thought, you know, this film is making you realize about so many aspects of our society, you know, media or judiciary or police, or you know, so many.
Do any of them? Are you positive about any of those aspects which came out?
I think what I'm positive about, that, you know, young people you know, they want to they reflect on things and they comment on it. And you know, more they would be aware, less gullible they would be. I think that we have a good future. If we are gullible, you know, really gullible, anybody can change our opinion. That makes you sad. Like, you know, sometimes I have sat with judges, you know, and discussed all these things sometimes, and I ask them, you know, whether the media, public opinion, does it, you know, color your, you know, judgment. They say we get influenced, and that's a very sad thing, you know, to hear.
But interestingly, I spoke to the sister-in-law and brother of Rajesh and Nupur, of Rajesh Talvar, and I asked them that What do you feel about this movie? Are you hopeful about it? And I think their cousin saw this movie and was actually said it's a fair thing, and they're hoping that there may be an impact because public opinion has become such a key factor in deciding the fate of it. Do you think, would you hope that the court would perhaps look at some of the questions raised in your movie? Do you feel that Talvars are guilty?
I hope that there should be a kind of relook at all these mishaps which are happening, and no innocent person should be victimized, and a sense of awareness. People should be a little cautious when they pronounce a judgment, or when they hear something, some news on the channel, they should be skeptical about it. No, because
no, I agree with you.
Yeah,
you must have
because
all sides.
they shouldn't be so gullible that whatever media is saying, they should they should think that they shouldn't be in a hurry to pass a judgment, or that somebody should solve a case and give it to you and they will believe that. And I think they should leave it something for doubt.
Do you think the judgment was, do you think that Talvars are guilty? When you take on the role of an investigative officer, and Arun Kumar went on record to say he didn't think they were guilty. He thought the domestic
my character who investigated, he solved the case in a way, and he has his own theory who killed it, but definitely not Talvar.
Konkona, public opinion, prejudice. I mean, it played out in interesting ways because, of course, there was one view who said that that because the Talvars are maybe from a relatively privileged middle class as compared to this domestic help who worked with them, it's easy to say the domestic help did it. And I think in the first 1 or 2 days, the way it was reported also, it seemed that Hemraj had done it till his body was discovered, and then now we have to find another suspect, or we have to find someone else to pin it onto. Was it interesting for you to see how that public opinion played out, or finding an easy villain really to look at to pin this on?
No, public opinion and trial by media, these two things go hand in hand, and I think a lot of weight is given to them, perhaps unnecessarily, because even when we watch the television news channels, some more than others, you're perfectly aware that they're going on and on about a particular case because people want to watch it more, or that is getting them more TRPs. It's not necessarily because another more important story has not broken out, So now that is something which channels have to have some kind of journalistic ethic. People also are in such a rush because nobody wants to, if you look at all the facts of the case, it's fairly tedious. There's so much information available, but very few people have the patience to go through all of that and then come to an informed decision in any case. Most people, like I said, they've made up their minds already. When they knew I was playing this part, so many people came into me, but that she's done it. And in fact, and the deeper I've, because as I said earlier, I didn't know very much, and the deeper I got into this, the more I was convinced that, you really can't tell anymore, because those crucial few hours, whatever, few days, evidence was contaminated, evidence was compromised, and I think one thing that everyone has learnt is that the crime scene has to be sealed off. Some people have to come in and do their work there, so that we can take this forward, otherwise how?
When you watch, say, Nupur's interview, when you watch Nupur's interactions, what did you think?
See, when I first watched Nupur with you, in fact, and I watched it quite a few times, I watched it with Meghna, in fact, in the office. And we were just discussing that she is not how women are depicted. This is not how we see women in the media, whether it's films or, television stories and things like that. And especially, firstly, we very rarely really see an older woman and such complex emotions in a realistic way portrayed. So she's not conforming to various conventions, which is then difficult for people to accept. So this is like a collective thing, on the part of filmmakers, newsmakers and audiences. Together, they have to have a more, a representation of women in a more realistic manner, an experience of their world, in a more realistic manner.
Yes, because ironically, it's often in Bollywood films we take the insight how women should be when they lose a child, or how women should behave. So perhaps now it's the other way around. But Vishalji, you talked about society and media, but one very important aspect has been the judiciary and investigation, because again, this case had a lot of public attention, but the way the investigations were handled, and I think the film, the script you wrote talks about that really, the 3 different teams, almost 3 different conclusions after each of those. and the fact that how long justice takes. Ironically, as you're saying that even if Nupur's case is fast-tracked for bail in the Allahabad High Court, their case is pending from the 80s. So when we look at justice, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it scares you that if you someday, God forbid, you will end up in this kind of situation, then you are gone for your life. So this country actually scares you as far as the judiciary is concerned. So coming back to these investigations, you know, we try to be very neutral to all the investigations which were done. And there is a scene in the film where which is the climax of the film, where and actually there were only 3 teams, but the conclusions were 2. The first Noida team and the second CBI team, they said that the parents were guilty, and the first investigation team said that the servants were guilty. But the first and the third team, they had the different, you know, weapon of killing weapon were different. So we have a scene which was a fact when we researched, that both the teams were made to sit opposite each other in the CBI headquarters, and they were asked to convince the head of the CBI. So they had to take some call in the courts, and both sides were so convincing, and that's, I think, the best scene of the film to me. It's a 13-minute long scene where they are they are trying to convince each other with the evidences, and it actually confuses you, and it confuses someone, but at the same time it really challenges you to make your own call. That you can actually make your call, that whether the parents are guilty or not, they should not be convicted, they should not be behind the bars. And that's why the CBI decided to put a closure report, which was rejected by the court. And yesterday, in the audience, Mr. Ram Jethmalani was there, and he said that it's I mean, because he's such a big lawyer and he's so respected, that he could say in public that the judge was stupid enough to reject that report.
No, it's true, but just going beyond the film slightly, of course, I said I said really the powerhouse of talent around this table. And Meghna, it must have been interesting to direct a film written by Vishal Bhardwaj, and daunting as well, and to direct Irrfan. Konkona, of course, you have before, but said it must have been an interesting task.
No, daunting.
Daunting. Go back. Scary.
Daunting.
Why daunting?
Because they all have an equation. They've all worked together, and I was an outsider. And
but you are the boss now.
Well, yeah, thematically. But no, I think nothing is more fulfilling when you know that you've earned the trust of the people that you admire and look up to. And when you get to know that and reach that in your creative process, nothing is more satisfying or encouraging, actually. So it started off very scary and overwhelming, but it turned out to be very beautiful.
I know why she's saying daunting, because in one scene, she wanted me to wear chappals.
But that should be quite easy.
It was so hot. It was so hot. Shoes, actually. It was so hot, and it was night, and with garmi, it's so hot in Delhi, and you are exhausted at night, and we are doing party scene. मैं नहीं पहनूंगा, कहाँ से मैं सिर्फ कहाँ से पूरा दिखेगा, मैं कहाँ दिखाऊँ, कैमरा कहाँ है. So I saw that, मैंने कहा एक दिख रहा है, एक पहनूंगा. Oh
no! So you were difficult. You were difficult.
No, so can you imagine? You're making a film like this, and this is what is going on behind the scenes. So
you must have wanted to say, oh my God,
you have to keep your sanity intact, and we've canned it like that. He's worn one shoe.
Listen, you have a young kid, you should know how to handle difficult people.
No, it was not difficult, it was just fabulous. I don't look at it as difficult. He knew, and I trusted him, and
he's
done it with one shoe.
No, you said party scene is interesting, because again, when you talk about news channels and the rumors that were going around, that they were into wife swapping, or they were part of some party swapping.
That's not the party we were shooting.
No, but it was just interesting to talk about rumors and how rumors become truth. Is that one aspect that you looked at as well, that when you had to give in all the facts, because it's interesting you said facts, because actually one of the issues of the Talvar case was there seemed to be the hype or the rumors actually outdid the facts. Did you find that at all when you were reading about it or something? Or Did you this wife swapping angle you all haven't touched on at all? I hope.
No, we have.
Okay.
We have touched on it, and you know, like they say that truth is stranger than fiction. So you have facts which have many versions. Okay, so which is why the best way to approach this film, what Vishalji came up with, was to then present all the versions with equal conviction, and with the same conviction that they have when they presented their versions, and then leave it. You know, we are hoping that we have a fairly intelligent audience, and we're a fairly evolved society, and when information that has been coming to you over a period of 8 years is then compiled and put together in a fairly simple manner, which you can understand as simply as when you go to watch a film, it would help you to understand what is fact, what is rumor, what is fiction.
Would you want the Talvars to see the film, Vishalji?
Yes, of course. I mean, if any way, you know, we can have a screening inside the jail. So I would love them to see the film, because I think somewhere they trusted, and they knew that we are going to show all the 3 investigations in a very neutral manner, and somewhere they trusted us. So I really want them to see the film.
This angle, when you said about a family and the rumors that went around, it's almost been like in medieval times when we have people to throw stones, that this is how family life is becoming. This is what this shows, that, you know, that traditional culture is better and more Western culture. And you, again, I think you had the Uttar Pradesh police saying that, you know, she had so many SMSs with some boy, or, you know, she was in touch with so many boys. That clash of cultures was also fascinating, because it's really about a young generation, and suddenly if you had a policeman from another generation, another culture investigating that, there are these clashes and confusion and tragedies which actually come out of that. Did you, and that may well be happening now. I mean, the Indrani Mukherjee case is one case, tomorrow it will be some other case. Do you find that clash of generations much more in our cities, Noida, Gurgaon, Mumbai, Navi Mumbai?
It's more than the generation, as the class divide, you know, and the educational system and the lifestyles. You know, there is so much lifestyle difference between Bombay and Delhi, and, you know, person in Etawah or a small town. You know, during the interrogation, you know, when the mother says that she was supposed to go for a sleepover to a friend's place, so that becomes an issue with the police. That what do you mean by the sleepover? They say that friends, you know, they stay in a house, and which is very common in our metros now. And so what do they do without the parents when they sleep? So these kind of, you know, things, when they come up, it actually tells you the class divide, or the divide of life, the kind of lifestyles we have in one country.
Final words, Irrfan, Konkona, when any roles, and I mean really both of you, I think between you have had a gamut of complete roles, from Jurassic to Piku to now a younger, to an inspector, and from Mrs. Iyer to Mrs. Talvar. Final thoughts on what made a difference to you in this movie, and as an actor, do you just move on now? Is it just this movie's over, or do you keep traces of this character with you as you go ahead? And
I think one process is when you like the script and you get involved, and there is a, you know, process, creative process, and, you know, you get engaged. You have, you know, that kind of memories with you. But, you know, the other chapter starts when you leave the film. Jab aap dulan ko bida kar dete hain, and you know, you leave her to sasural, and then how it's received there, that creates another story. You know, that's another phase, which, you know, sometimes is very pleasant and very engaging and very enriching. So, you know, now the second phase is starting, so I would love to you know, see what it does. And what this film is doing, I think, interestingly, that we are now being able to deal with our real incident stories and translate them into cinema, and engaging cinema where a universal audience can connect with it. And that's what we saw in Toronto, because most of the you know, audience were white people. They didn't know about the case, and they were mesmerized by the film, and they were laughing throughout the film because of the black humor. And I was really surprised there. So I hope that, you know, it creates because there's a new generation which is waiting to make films, you know, and they are going to change, you know, bring the diversity in our making.
No, and I hope it makes our news less filmy, maybe, because we leave that to you. But did it, when you said real life, because these are real life people, and as I said, these are, I mean, 2 people in jail currently. They may watch it or whatever. Does that scare you, that you don't want to perhaps do something which would maybe hurt anyone in any way, or because these are people who lost their daughter, or who were, I mean, of course, convicted of murdering her, but there's family out there, there are people who are intimately involved in a way actors aren't.
That's why we were very cautious while filming it. But you know, Vishal.
But while acting it as well as a character,
yeah,
as a
exactly.
person, because it's not just a character.
Yeah. So we were doing our research, and I had full faith in Vishal Saab's, version, and then I met the guy. Then so I was convinced, whatever I'm doing is not creating any kind of misconceptions, And then she had 6 years of research, and whenever I used to ask any question, she had the answers, Like she's not thinking about it. She had the facts.
She knew her
Facts.
material backwards.
I think it's been 6 years, oh God, but I said the most difficult for you, again, Konkona, final thoughts, because
it wasn't an easy film to shoot, of
yeah,
course.
Because
we were shooting, as we've said before, we were shooting in Noida, we were shooting in the summer, recreating these horrific scenes in various ways, time and again. We shot in the crematorium, etc. But all along, because of the people involved, I was always reassured that it was being done with a certain sense of responsibility, with a certain sensibility, a sensitivity, because, Vishalji's script, Meghna, and Meghna saying now she's daunted and all, but none of that was apparent at all. She's got a quiet strength and dignity on set, and she really knows her stuff. But because of all the people who were involved, I was reassured that it would be of a certain, standard.
you wouldn't mind if Nupur watched it. You wouldn't think it'd be a role that would this thing or whatever. It was not a role that would hurt her, you think, or it's not something that you feel maybe difficult from a mother who's actually lived through it and you portraying her. It's something that you're confident.
I cannot even imagine what her state of mind must be. I hope that she watches it. I hope that she thinks that it's fair, but I cannot even imagine the kind of anguish that she's been through.
I think fair. I think really that's the thing. As long as you can be assured of a fair hearing, a fair trial, a fair movie, I think that's really half the battle won. But I think it's an important movie because of the questions it raises. Thank you all very much for joining me on the Dialogues. Thank you.